and welcome to this special NFL Draft Reaction edition of the Brett Chat Sport or BCS Podcast. We're going to hear from a number of fans throughout this episode with their thoughts on how they feel their teams did in the draft, but let's start with the draft headlines. 6 quarterbacks were taken in the first 12 picks, with the first 3 picks all being quarterbacks. A record equaling 7 wide receivers were also taken in the first round, and it was notable that the first defensive player was not selected until pick number 15. With picks 1 and 9, the Chicago Bears were one of the most prominent teams headed into the draft. For more on this, let's hear from a couple of Bears fans with their thoughts on how their team's draft went.
I'm Brandon Gries with the 2024 NFL Draft recap for the Chicago Bears. Of course, the Bears had the number 1 overall pick and, as anticipated, took quarterback Caleb Williams from USC, the former Heisman Trophy winner. This was expected for a little more than a month since they traded Justin Fields to Pittsburgh back in mid-March, and that move cleared up any confusion about the future of the Bears quarterback position. Fans and media here believe that Caleb Williams will be the guy to lead Chicago back to the promised land, or at least in contention in the NFC North Division. The Bears haven't reached the postseason since 2020 and haven't made a Super Bowl since 2006. But the majority here again believes Williams has a chance to change the fate of the franchise that has not seen much success over the past 10 to 15 years. As Williams' number 1 selection was all but official, the real excitement for Chicago fans came at the number 9 spot, because the Bears had 2 picks in the top 10, and they took Washington wide receiver Rome Odunze, who will be a huge offensive threat and weapon for Caleb Williams to work with. Odunze led the nation with 1,640 receiving yards last season. He was a first-team All-American and one of the top players in the entire draft. If the Bears' selections had ended there after the first night, a lot of fans would have been content with just those 2 picks on the offensive side of the ball. But Chicago had 5 picks overall, and in the 3rd round took a local prospect, offensive tackle Karan Amagaji from Hinsdale Central High School out in the Chicago suburbs. Amagaji played collegiately at Yale, earning all-conference honors there in the Ivy League, and he'll be an important piece to protecting Caleb Williams in the future. Then in the 4th round, the Bears made headlines again with the selection of Iowa punter and Australia native Tory Taylor. Taylor was the Ray Guy Award winner last season, given to the nation's top punter, as he is an elite talent in aiding his team with good field position. His 4th round selection is the earliest a punter has been taken in the NFL draft since 2019. And finally, the Bears traded into the 5th round and finished their selections by taking Kansas defensive end Austin Booker. He had 8 sacks in the Big 12 last season, and his pick meant Chicago hit all 3 phases in this year's draft: offense, defense, and even special teams. When all said and done, a lot of analysts giving Chicago an A in this year's draft, of course anchored by those 2 top 10 picks in Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. Those 2 guys could be the future of the Bears offense for many years to come.
Hello, I'm Sean Anley, Chicago Bears fan. So no surprises when the Bears went with the quarterback Caleb Williams, number 1 overall. The only thing to really say about that is hopefully he's as good as advertised and can end decades of Bears quarterback misery. Most interesting pick for the Bears this year was what they do at number 9 overall, and they went with the wide receiver Rome Odunze. Love this pick because by adding him to Cole Kmet, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift, Caleb Williams can have no complaints in the weapons department, unlike other recent Bears quarterbacks. Bears only had 4 picks overall to start with, so they used the last 2 to address the O-line and the pass rush, which are the main remaining weaknesses on the team if Caleb Williams works out. So hopefully the future's looking bright. Bear down.
Thanks to Brandon and Sean for their thoughts and insights there. The Commanders also entered the draft with a lot of attention on them. Not only did they have the number 2 pick in the draft, but this was also going to be the first draft for them since Dan Snyder sold his stake in the team to the new ownership group led by Josh Harris. It's also worth noting that the Commanders have a new head coach in Dan Quinn as well. As expected, the Commanders selected quarterback Jaden Daniels from LSU with the number 2 pick. I can't claim to be an expert on him, But from what I've seen and from what everyone else is saying, he certainly seems like he's going to be a dual threat quarterback, able to both throw and run with the ball. If he can be consistent and be a game changer for the Commanders, then that's going to give them a great solid base to then build the rest of the team around. It should also be noted that the Commanders followed up Daniel's selection by adding some depth on the O-line, adding some depth across both defensive lines, and also adding to both the tight end and the wide receivers rooms. Far more knowledgeable people than I are also predicting that defensive back Mike Sainristil from the championship winning Michigan team at pick number 50 might end up being the sleeper steal of this draft too. Meanwhile, my team, the Patriots, also entered the draft with a lot of eyes on them, given that this is the first time since 1999 that Bill Belichick is not the head coach headed into the draft. We took Drake May from North Carolina with the third pick in the draft, before then enhancing our depth and quality on both sides of the ball across the rest of the draft. Overall, I'm very happy with this first draft under the new de facto general manager, Elliott Wolf. After we drafted May, I said that we need to get some more depth and quality across the O-line in order to protect May, and we could also do with getting at least one wide receiver from this historically deep wide receiver class of 2024. This is exactly what we did, as we then took wide receiver Jalin Polk from the University of Washington in the second round, before drafting offensive tackle Caden Wallace from Penn State in round 3, and offensive lineman Layden Robinson from Texas A&M, and wide receiver Javon Baker from the University of Central Florida in round 4. The fact that we then gave ourselves some more depth at cornerback and free safety by drafting Marcellus Dial from South Carolina in round 6, and also getting quarterback Joe Milton III from Tennessee and Jaheim Bell from Florida State in round 7 really was the icing on the cake. All in all then, I am very happy with this 2024 draft from the Patriots, and when I then look at the roster given the free agent signings we've made as well, I'm cautiously optimistic heading into both training camp and the new season. For his thoughts on how another team in the AFC East draft went, here is Ben Carter.
Hello, Ben Carter here, long-suffering New York Jets fan, to review their 2024 NFL draft. Going back to the first round, selected Oli Fashanu, offensive tackle out of Penn State, which felt at the time like a slightly boring pick, but I think it was one that had to be made. I think in an ideal world, the Jets would have been able to get Rome Odunze there, the wide receiver. And it looked for a moment like he might fall to them at 10 after the Falcons' shock pick of Penix, but it seems like the Bears had fallen in love with him just as much as the Jets had and took him. And after that, Jets were able to facilitate a trade back one spot with the Vikings to pick up some extra draft capital, which I think was a smart move, and then take Fashanu, who, again, not really a sexy pick for 2024. The Jets seem to have both tackle positions covered as it is, so he may not have a starting role come opening week of the season, but they're both 33-year-old tackles. Injuries are going to happen. The Jets have been decimated by injuries on the offensive line for as long as I can remember at this point. So getting in a guy who is so highly rated on the blind side to protect Aaron Rodgers is great. And he can obviously sit and hopefully learn from the likes of Tyron Smith in year one, improve and become the sort of franchise cornerstone in future. So, not a sexy pick, but a really smart one, I think. After that, the Jets took Malachi Corley, a wide receiver out of Western Kentucky, who I will admit I didn't know much about, but seems to be very highly rated. Some lofty comparisons to Deebo Samuel. If the Jets can get half the player Deebo is, I think that would be a great move. He gives them an extra asset in the wide receiver room. They obviously have Garrett Wilson, who will look to make another jump this year with Rodgers, and Mike Williams, who is a great number 2, but is coming off an ACL tear. So getting an extra body into that wide receiver room will be really good. And from what I've seen of Corley, he'll add an extra dimension to the offense. And then from there, the rest of the picks don't have a ton to say about them. Jordan Travis, quarterback out of Florida State, I think is a really smart pick. He can sit behind Rodgers and behind Tyrod Taylor this year and learn a lot from them and maybe be the franchise quarterback of the future. We've obviously seen guys sit and come out and do really well after that. So I think the Jets are smart to pick him up. A couple of defensive backs, including one from the Canadian Football League, which is just a really cool story that he'll have a chance to learn from the likes of Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed. The Jets obviously have a very talented defense, so nice to get some extra resource there. And then I guess the weird move of the draft, getting 2 running backs, given they already have Breece Hall They drafted a running back last year. I imagine one of those three, the two rookies and Abani Kanda, who was the third choice last year, will be cut at the end of the season, at the end of the preseason. Sorry. So we'll see how that plays out in camp. But overall, a good draft for the Jets. I think they added some extra draft picks for next year as well, which will be useful. So can't complain.
One of the biggest headlines and surprises from the draft was the Atlanta Falcons selecting quarterback Michael Penix Jr. from the University of Washington with the 8th pick. This was particularly surprising given that they had only just signed Kirk Cousins to a 4-year, $180 million contract last month. For more on this, let's hear from Falcons fan and friend of the show, Charlie Deeks.
Hi all, I'm Charlie and I'm unfortunately an Atlanta Falcons fan. We have been widely panned throughout the NFL draft community, somewhat fairly, somewhat unfairly, and I'll run through what I think about the picks. Of course, the big pick for the Falcons, the big pick in the first round was Michael Penix Jr. at number 8. I didn't know what to feel when I watched the pick live. It was a strange moment where nobody expected us to take a quarterback after signing Kirk Cousins for $180 million in free agency. But having watched Desmond Ridder attempt to throw a football for the last 2 years, Marcus Mariota attempt to throw a football, having a quarterback is something that money can't buy, really. So I think having a quarterback that the team clearly believes is the franchise quarterback of the future isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. I think there's a problem with the draft capital we've spent on that. Obviously the 8th overall pick is big, but it's not like we're one first round edge rusher cornerback away from a Super Bowl anyway. I do think there's been some sensible picks in the later rounds to try and recoup some of that draft capital. I think we did well in a couple of areas. So for example, Ruko Rororo in the second round, good player, really rangy, really high athletic score. Exactly the sort of player this team wants and needs. Not sure about necessarily trading up, although clearly GMs know stuff that we don't, and I don't think it's that much, if a reach at all, to pick him at that spot. The only thing is going to be whether he is outperformed by the other big defensive tackle still on the board, Jerzan Newton, who ended up being taken the pick after. So we'll keep an eye on that. That's something that I'm sure he'll be compared to for the rest of his career, but I'm pretty pleased with how that's going. And then the next 2 picks, again, address huge needs on the Falcons' defensive line, front 7. Braylon Price out of Washington, another Washington pick, a really good player. Very solid, probably more of a rotational guy rather than a starting guy, but that's fine. It's the 3rd round. What are you going to do? And then Brandon Dorlus, another really solid player from Oregon. He probably the steal of the draft. He was mocked sort of in the early 3rd in most places. He was number 75 on Dane Brugler's list. So to get him at 109 is a really good place. Rest of the picks, not particularly awe-inspiring. That's sort of to be expected. Really interesting pick in J.D. Bertrand, the linebacker out of Notre Dame. Really good player, again, just a very solid, put up a lot of stats, and a huge character guy. So really will fit in with the Falcons, I hope. In terms of our needs more widely, one huge need wasn't addressed, and that's cornerback. So we didn't take a corner at all in the draft. We've signed 2 corners to undrafted free agent deals. That's Trey Vaval out of Minnesota State Mankato, a college I've never even heard of. He was 133rd among corners on Dane Brugler's big beast, and Jaden Price at number 97 in the beast from North Dakota State. North Dakota State, of course, is a powerhouse of the lower divisions football. They were the I want to say D3 national champions in the last year. So there may be some good value there, but we can't really expect anything out of undrafted free agents. We have in the past. Brian Poole, really good undrafted free agent that we ended up sending off to the Jets, took a really good free agency contract, but it was solid for us for 4 years. So we might get some more. What I expect actually is that the GM has already been on the phone to people, I mean, the best cornerbacks on the market are people like Stephon Gilmore, Steven Nelson, Adoree Jackson, and Kayla Witherspoon. So I'd be very, very shocked if Terry Fontenot wasn't already in the free agency pool there. So those are my thoughts on the draft. I think the Falcons did better than maybe advertised. I think there's a world in which Kirk Cousins plays for 2 years, the Falcons get better and better, and then they hand off to Michael Penix and he starts for the next 15 years. That's what we want. Don't know whether it'll happen, but if that's what we get, then it's an A+ draft. As it is, in terms of resource allocation, maybe not the best draft we could have had, but I'm not a GM, so I trust in what they're doing. They've been okay for the past couple of years. Don't hate the picks they've made. Love the offensive picks. We've got a really solid team on paper. I think we can go as far as we can make a run in the playoffs if we do well. We should be winning the NFC South, but we'll see.
Thanks for that, Charlie. All the other teams are also drafting as well, so let's hear from some of their fans, starting with friends of the show, Russell Eassom and Jennifer Anley.
Hi, I'm Russell Eassom, and I am a Cleveland Browns fan. So, Cleveland on the draft is a bit different to everybody else. We didn't have a first-round pick, thanks to the trade for Deshaun Watson a few years back, but our top pick was Mike Hall, a defensive tackle from Ohio State, and he fits, we think, what kind of like Schwartz and the front office have been planning to do this. They've kind of got an idea of how they want to apply the defensive pressure. It worked a lot through this season, and they pretty much think they found a guy who will fit that for them. So it'll be very interesting to see how he fits in. He's only 20, never really a full-time starter at Ohio State, so we'll kind of see how that continues. For the other picks, they kind of really stuck again with that kind of like methodology of what they kind of planned throughout the other season. So we took like an LB, a CB, another DT. The couple of interesting ones I would kind of pull out, Nathaniel Watson, who they took in the 6th round. I think he's interesting, and if things go well during kind of like preseason or even at the start of the season, he might make that lineup. The kind of like the question really was Jamari Thrash, who they took in the 5th round. He's a wide receiver. Cleveland do need some effort there, and if he works well, I do think he could become something. But I think it was a bit bland, a bit simple to try and do that. So as a whole, have Cleveland like addressed their needs? Well, kind of maybe. There wasn't a massive need with this team. Obviously, made the playoffs last year. That was off the back of like the Flacco run, even though there were injuries obviously to Watson and to Chubb, our best running back. So what Cleveland really needs is a year of not massive injuries, and they've added players which I think fit to the defensive system which they want to kind of push. So yeah, I think it's a reasonable draft. It's a not very interesting draft because when you don't have that first round pick, you don't have the same, but hey, 2025 is coming and Cleveland will actually have a first round pick again. So let's see how that does.
Hi guys, I'm Jennifer. I'm a Las Vegas Raiders fan, and we drafted Brock Bowers from Georgia 1st round. It was a quintessential Raiders pick in that nobody expected it, and it makes no sense. Looks like he'll be a great tight end, and throughout the draft, the Raiders seem to pick up offensive pieces, including strengthening the O-line, which is great. It kind of seems like instead of drafting a quarterback, we're going to just build a great supporting cast, and it doesn't matter how bad AOC or Gardner Minshew might be, that hopefully everybody else will be good enough to pick up the pieces. So, another Raiders draft day. We'll see.
Hi, my name's Jason. I'm a Steelers fan. I know I've got the wrong cap on, but I've got the towel, so that counts. Our first pick was Troy Fautanu, interior lineman. Much needed pick. One of our biggest areas of weakness going into the season was the entire inside line, really. Fautanu looks pretty good. He's quite a mobile sort of. He's not the biggest lineman, but he's got the mobility and the tools to do what we need him to do. So that looks good. Zach Frazier was our 2nd round pick. Centre again, desperately needed. I think Frazier may actually be the better lineman, especially at his position. So that's a really good pick that I was very pleased about. Roman Wilson from Michigan, the wide receiver. Not a huge fan. It was a position we needed to fill, and I trust Omar to know what he's doing much more than I do. So happy with that. Another Wilson in round 3. Peyton, much bigger fan of that pick. Linebacker, he should be a good one. Feel that sort of a depth need, if you will. Last year we had quite a lot of injuries in that area, so good to see that we're stocking up there. Mason McCormick at guard. Haven't really got much of an opinion on him. I didn't watch for some reason. Didn't watch it at South Dakota State last year, so not very knowledgeable on him. But again, guard interior line depth is always good. Logan Lee from Iowa at D tackle. Again, somewhere we needed depth. So a good late round pick, purely based on position. And Ryan Watts to round it off at cornerback. Cornerback, I think, is the one area we still need to focus on going into the season. Because our secondary hasn't been that good. We've got JPJ is pretty good, but he needs some help. So that's a good pick there. Have we addressed our needs? I think we have. We've definitely addressed the biggest needs. We were crying out for help on the offensive line. I think we've definitely got that. Defensively, we were pretty good, and again, we've got a late round cornerback for depth, which I think was definitely needed. I'd like to see another cornerback come in. Someone more established that can help out there. But yeah, overall I'm very happy with our draft.
Thanks to all of those guys for their contributions. Finally, from a British perspective, aside from multiple UK-based fans being named their team's International Fan of the Year, and so getting a chance to announce one of their team's draft picks this weekend, the main headline was Travis Clayton being selected from the NFL's International Player Pathway Program as an offensive lineman by the Buffalo Bills in the 7th round. What makes this particularly notable is that Clayton has never played a game of American football before and was previously playing 8th tier rugby union for his hometown club, Basingstoke, in the Counties 2 Hampshire division. This is a massive coup for the International Player Pathway Programme, particularly given that Louis Rees-Zammit has also been signed to a contract by the Kansas City Chiefs. If Clayton can now make it through training camp and onto the Bills' 53-man regular season roster, I've no doubt that International Player Pathway Programme founder O.C. Onyenwere will be having kittens, to coin a British phrase. Finally, let's end with thoughts from some of our contributors on who they think won the draft.
In terms of teams I think probably won the draft, this is a team that hopefully the Falcons have followed the mould of, in that they were widely panned for their draft last year and then they ended up in the NFC Championship game. So it's the Detroit Lions for me to take Terrion Arnold, which was a great pick at 24 when he was mocked as high as sort of 8 and 10. I think is probably a really, really nice pick. Not necessarily the most athletic corner, but really high football IQ, really, really solid in coverage. And then getting another really strong corner in Ennis Rakestraw Jr. out of Missouri, who was a really, really good player for a really good defense last year. Sort of a bit of a surprise, but a really, really solid team. And then some really interesting picks in the later rounds. They traded back into the 4th. They traded next year's 3rd for Giovanni Manu, who is a Canadian huge tackle. And they took the Lions-iest pick possible, which was a hybrid safety running back, Sione Vaki out of Utah. So really interesting picks. And again, I think they have a real potential to take those picks and make a Super Bowl in the coming year.
Who won the draft? I would have to give that. I don't want to. It's probably the Patriots, right? But I'm not going to give it to the Patriots. I'm going to say the Eagles won the draft because they got probably the 2 best cornerbacks on the board in the 1st and 2nd round. Can't ask for much more than that. So I would say Eagles probably won the draft. Patriots 2nd. I'm thinking we had a top 5 draft in the Steelers, mind you. I'm a very happy fan as things stand.
Once again, thank you to everyone who contributed to this episode. For now, though, I thank you very much for joining me, and I certainly hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye now. The BCS Podcast is written, produced, edited and hosted by me, Brett Walker. Thank you to Music Unlimited and Pictorbay for the use of the music and sound effects. This episode featured contributions from Jennifer and Sean Annoley, Ben Carter, Charlie Deeks, Russell Eassom, Brandon Gries and Jason Toms.